Hello, I'm Crawford Allen, and on behalf of the Coalition to End Wildlife Trafficking Online, convened jointly by WWF Traffic and I4, thank you everyone for joining this virtual presentation. I would much prefer to be in Paris in person, of course, but I am grateful for this opportunity to talk to you about our work and how we are adapting to the pandemic to keep up the pressure on wildlife trafficking online. Over the coming days, our coalition team looks forward to speaking with many of you at the forum to learn about your experiences, enhancing governance approaches that could also help us and be applied to this work. But first, I wanted to show a personal perspective. I've been working on this issue, conservation, for over 25 years, and this last year has been filled with unprecedented challenges for all of us. And I'd like to just offer my concern and respect to all of you for getting through these difficult times. In a normal year, I'd be fortunate to travel to wild places and enjoy nature. This image you see here brings back some very powerful memories for me of sitting out all night at a waterhole in Etosha National Park in Namibia, with lightning crashing around on the horizon. It was a spectacular display, and it lit up the incredible wildlife that came to drink and commune at the waterhole. There were rhinos, giraffe, elephants, hyena, and many other species that were emerging out of the gloom and took their turns to fill up with water. And there were young elephants having fun, and there were all sorts of different interactions and animal behaviors going on. And as you can imagine, it really was quite something to behold. And I hope to get back there someday. But that scene in Namibia and these species are at risk as wilderness dwindles and wildlife is poaching and trafficked. Wildlife trafficking is the second biggest threat to endangered species after habitat loss. It involves trading live animals like birds and tiger cubs for pets and attractions, and a staggering list of wildlife products for food, medicine, fashion, status symbols, and many other uses. Wildlife markets like this one I photographed in Asia before the pandemic, where people, food, pets, and wildlife intermingle, illustrates the risk of zoonotic transmission of disease that are increased by illegal wildlife trade. Here I saw a European trader that was stuffing the live birds he bought into a specially adapted cabin roll-on bag, and that trader probably made connections to the sellers in the market via social media groups online. The birds he were buying could have been carrying zoonotic disease, especially as that market is notorious for trading in wildlife without veterinary checks. And when it comes to smuggled wildlife, this animal, the pangolin, is the most trafficked mammal in the world. In 2019, some 200,000 pangolins were trafficked for their scales alone. Or one pangolin is trafficked every 3 minutes. And that is despite of international, national, local protections for all of the 8 pangolin species worldwide. Pangolins may have been one of the intermediary host species that transferred COVID-19 to humans, but prior to the pandemic, many people didn't even know what this incredible creature was. And unfortunately for pangolins, there are multifaceted demand for their meat, their scales, and their leather. Their scales, for example, are most in demand right now, and they're used in traditional Asian medicine for a variety of applications. The meat is served as very expensive luxury dishes in restaurants in some Asian countries, and the pangolins are kept alive to stay fresh. And of course, that's an added risk of virus transmission when you have those live animals that are shedding virus with people. Their skins are used to create leather boots, such as these boots and belts and other leather products. And as a result of the major devastation on pangolin populations and the massive trade to Asia, as well as that unfortunate link to COVID-19, pangolins now are getting a great deal of attention in various sectors. But of course, wildlife trade globally is really big business, and the illegal trade in thousands of wild animals and plant species touches pretty much every country in the world. The UN and Interpol estimate that the illegal trade in wildlife is worth up to 23 billion US dollars annually. It's the fourth largest transnational criminal activity, run by highly organized criminal syndicates, because this is a low risk and high reward crime. Although in recent years, in fact, there's been increasing impact on the criminal networks and rapid progress in both detection, investigation, the penalties and prosecutions, and there have been large investments from donor governments like the US and the EU. And those risks of wildlife trade, it has many negative impacts on local communities, on economies, human health, and national security. Organized crime induces corruption and breaks down rule of law. And some funds from illegal trade are being used to fund militias and others, and funding other criminal nature, organized criminal activity globally. The loss of natural resources and livelihoods to local people cannot be underestimated. It generates incentives also to further degrade and overexploit nature. The zoonotic spillover impact of COVID-19 arising from wildlife trade is just this terrible mix of global impacts on both human lives, economies, and nature together. Oh, I forgot to mention also that there is this problem with the transport system, in that it's being abused by criminal networks, and there's a high degree of transnational organized criminal cooperation and corruption that adds a great deal of risk to those supply chain and logistics companies and transport companies in their corporate operations. And one species that has been smuggled across the world on very high levels and for very great profit is the rhino. And rhinos have been one of the hardest hit by poaching, driven by the enormous price of rhino horn as a fashionable tonic, a cancer treatment, and a status symbol in some countries. But there is hope, and you can see from this chart here that rhino poaching in South Africa is declining from that terrible previous record level of 5 years ago, down from 1,215 rhinos killed in that year to 594 rhinos killed last year for their horn. Obviously, it's still a big problem, and there does remain consumer demand for rhino horn that's being promoted through social media channels in some consumer nations. And of course, elephants, we're all very familiar that elephants have become really the poster child for the illegal wildlife trade, with such a devastating impact. An estimated 15,000 African elephants are poached every year for their ivory. This is a decrease from previous years, and with twice that amount being killed at the peak in 2011, though that number is still devastatingly high for these populations across Africa. Now, the trade in ivory is linked to the highest levels of criminality, with highly organized routing of ivory to avoid detection. There's bribery involved, paying officials at border points, and transport staff are being paid to look the other way. And there are now major stockpiles held in certain countries around the world, and they are being leaked and distributed by middlemen sellers, and then traded quite often through online platforms. But one of the challenges that wildlife trade has is identifying species to their products, to their origin, and to identify to the species level. Elephant ivory can be challenging for enforcement officials, especially when the tusk has been carved into statues or jewelry or something else. Elephant ivory exhibits this unique feature known as Schrager lines. So if you can look within the orange boxes, you might be able to see this crisscross pattern, and they use that to help confirm whether that's actually real elephant ivory, which has the Schrager lines, or whether it's a resin plastic or from another species that also carries types of ivory, like hippopotamus. It's very difficult when you see the images like this online, because you don't have it physically in your hand and there's only a photograph. So we've been working on trying to resolve that. But increasingly, we're seeing the shift from wildlife trade to coming online far more than in physical markets. And you can see exotic pets like these tiger cubs really are found much more increasingly online now. Criminals take advantage of this anonymity that's provided by the internet. They're cloaking or they're changing their identities as they need to avoid detection. And this provides this additional hurdle for law enforcement, as the illegal wildlife advertisements are hidden online amongst billions of other posts every single day. And unfortunately, due to COVID, the physical market closures as well that have been put in place post-COVID in some countries, and the nature of COVID lockdown and people not moving around means there is less opportunity to trade wildlife face to face. And so the online shift is a real thing. And this is not just typical e-commerce and auction sites. Social media has become a front line for wildlife sales, and they're increasingly exploited because of things like their private messaging functionality that they have on social media sites. So you can communicate anonymously. And the internet is exponentially facilitating this trade. It's turning local markets into global ones online, and it encourages greater consumer demand. Even the largest platforms are being used by criminal groups to traffic wildlife globally. Often buyers don't realize that the species or their products are illegal, they're facing extinction in the wild, or they're high-risk species for potential disease transmission. It's impossible for law enforcement to police the internet effectively for the range of illicit goods that are openly available across the board globally. This picture here is from a co-hosted workshop led by Interpol and I4, one of our partners, with the tech companies, law enforcement and policymakers coming together to find common ground for collaboration and identifying joint solutions to shutting down the illegal wildlife trade. So after years of struggling to support enforcement in stopping wildlife trafficking online, I recognized that the main way of addressing it was actually with the companies themselves, from the inside. I conceptualized a global cooperative where companies prevent the illegal listings from being posted in the first place. It took many more years after that to really bring this together. But in 2018, a partnership between WWF, Traffic, and I4 launched the Coalition to End Wildlife Trafficking online to unite the tech sector to see it as a solution to this growing threat. It's become a critical piece in the broader work to strengthen global governance of online protections for wildlife and consumers. The coalition has grown, as you can see here, to 37 companies today, including all the biggest names online like eBay, Alibaba, Google, Tencent, and Facebook. And these companies between them cover the majority of the internet. And in fact, the coalition companies combined have over 9 billion user accounts in total, with operations across the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Now, the approach of the coalition is fairly straightforward. We've developed this interconnected strategy centered on solutions generated by industry collaboration. The coalition is non-confrontational, it's not blaming companies, but it is a safe space where companies rise above any competitive issues to share their ideas on best practices, lessons learned, and innovation. As you'll see here, we have a number of facets to the approach, including at its heart a global standard policy on prohibited wildlife. This aligns the companies within their own existing systems and ensure that they've got laws and policies that are enforceable for their company and their sites. We're training their staff to better detect prohibited wildlife products there's an comprehensive e-learning program we developed for the companies. Many of the companies now use this as a standard for all of their online enforcement staff. We have assistance and development underway with enhancing the automated detection filters. They're essential to improve machine learning to actually automatically detect problematic ads and listings online and remove them. And we've developed a list of key search words that are used by online criminals. At the moment, that's about 1,500 different key search words that we've identified, and it's expanding all the time. We're also focusing on the user base of these companies, and we're going to that user base to raise awareness and empower them to report suspicious listings. At the core of this effort is really trying to prevent these wildlife traffickers from shifting their activities from one platform to the next, kind of creating an online blockade, if you like. And so for results, I mean, to date, the company coalition partners have blocked or removed 3.3 million listings that violated prohibited wildlife policies between 2018 and 2020. And that number is probably actually higher because the companies have increased their abilities to track prohibited wildlife listings, and they've actually prevented a lot of those listings from being posted in the first place. And by blocking or removing these listings, the companies are directly stopping the profits made from over 3.3 million transactions that could have gone into the pockets of organized crime. This demonstrates to traffickers it's no longer easy to market an endangered live animal or plant or illegal wildlife product online. It reduces their motivation to take on the risk of trafficking in these incredible creatures from the wild. And so we produced a report that summarizes some of the successes which you can access on endwildlifetraffickingonline.org. I'll share that link at the end. But just to note that prior to the coalition's report, most of these companies did not have wildlife included in their reporting pathways, meaning they couldn't even track the actions taken to help prevent these illegal sales. Now companies are allocating staff time to actively seek and remove prohibited wildlife listings, as well as dedicating valuable staff time to training programs and other coalition priorities. And I just wanted to give you a little spotlight on one particular partner that's working with us at the Paris Peace Forum, and that's eBay. It's one of the most prominent e-commerce platforms internationally. eBay was one of the first companies to see the shift of illegal wildlife products online, particularly in elephant ivory. And they've been working to tackle that trade in elephant ivory on their platform for over a decade. And so rather than shying away from these issues, eBay has worked alongside WWF and I4 to address it head on, and they've demonstrated amazing success. And so between just 2017 and 2019, they blocked 265,000 listings for items that are prohibited under their animal products policy. Also, eBay's done many other things. It's hosted coalition trainers. We've done in-house training for their enforcement staff. They've enhanced their policies as necessary as things change to adapt to new trends. And they regularly roll out messaging internationally to their community for things like World Elephant Day, World Tiger Day. Thank you to eBay. But on a new threat and a new trend that is emerging as well is the issue related to COVID and a lot of misinformation online around endangered wildlife products that could be seen as an alleged cure or a prevention of the COVID-19 virus. On social media, there's been encouragement for retaliation against species like bats that are known to transmit zoonotic disease, and they're, of course, the original source, most likely, of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that led to COVID-19. And we're helping companies refining their policies prohibiting harmful acts for wildlife, for example, with pop-up alerts on sites like Instagram and Facebook, where if you type in certain search words like tiger cub for sale or buy antique ivory, if you do that now on your Facebook or your Instagram site, you'll see a pop-up that alerts you to the potential risks involved and a link to our coalition website to get you more information. Some of the examples of other COVID cures are things like rhino horn. Or these rhino horn pills are being claimed to cure COVID. Bear bile and tiger bone medicines are being sold online in Asia as COVID cures. And the companies are stepping up together to take down this misinformation that could have people investing a great deal of money that threatens species and maybe doesn't do anything for them anyway. We're helping them reduce their risk, therefore, of the transmission chances of COVID-2 through high-risk species being traded on their platforms. So as I close, I just wanted to end on a more hopeful note, because we know the world is in upheaval. We've heard there's hope on the horizon, whether for you that's a vaccine, or whether that's for me for protection of wildlife and preventing and having a future with no wildlife traded illegally online. But nature is remarkable, and now more than ever before, we've really realized how much our own survival depends on nature. So now is the time to stop and reflect on human behavior, how we interact with the natural world and each other, and how we can learn from the current situation to prevent future pandemics. For wildlife protection and disease risk reduction, having these powerhouse companies stepping up to tackle this issue together, it's reshaping the governance of sales on the internet, and it's reducing risky consumer behaviors. With 9 billion users to inform across 37 companies, there really is much to do. But just as the internet enables this illicit trade, the power of connectivity of people and this collaboration across the sector will truly counter it. So I leave you with a thanks, but also to let you know that you can work with us. You can help educate your networks about illegal wildlife trade online and encourage them to report any listings found directly through those company platforms. They see the listing, or you can do that through our website, endwildlifetraffickingonline.org. With effective tech governance and a human response, we can help keep wildlife offline and in the wild. Thank you. I'll now open it up to questions. Okay, we have some questions coming in the chat box. We have about 10 more minutes, 9 more minutes to cover those. So thank you for people for taking that time. So one of the questions we have is, part of the approach relies on cooperation with law enforcement, but governments and local police are not always on board. How to encourage better cooperation? You know, that is one of the biggest challenges we do have, is this issue about sharing information between the companies and between law enforcement. There are legal channels where companies have to give information. Companies are concerned about privacy laws and so-called phishing trips by law enforcement asking for huge data dumps of everything they have. It's quite a challenge to do that. But we've worked closely with Interpol, and we've brought the expertise in of police and customs and law enforcement to discuss this together. We've held numerous platforms and had panel events around this, and we're finding a way forward in which we can cooperate. I think the critical thing is that we need to understand the weaknesses and the strengths of both the law enforcement side and the company side, and try and find some common ground. We're working together on finding a way to do that through a cooperation protocol for the companies and guidance on how they can work best with law enforcement and how enforcement can get the best from the companies. Some companies are also concerned about issues of corruption within law enforcement. And of course, that can be valid as well. It's something to bear in mind. But I think we have to take steps forward. And I think we're working with the companies to identify what is the most crucial information that should be shared with law enforcement. What shows a high level of organization and criminality that law enforcement just has to know about. We're not looking to try and penalize somebody's grandmother who has an heirloom ivory necklace who wants to try and sell it and doesn't maybe even realize it's made from an endangered species, but really get to grips with those criminal networks. There was another question, thank you. To what extent has animal trafficking shifted from traditional markets to the dark net? How might you tackle that risk? Well, this is a really great point, because this is the fundamental basis of our approach with the coalition. We understand that it's all too easy right now to trade illegal wildlife online, on the open web, on the surface web, with a very, very large potential marketplace, with a lot of people just not realizing that this could be illegal, and sort of traders and traffickers getting away with that for a very long time. The idea here is that we make it too difficult for those traders to make a living on the open web, that forces them into the dark web. And once in the dark web, they have a much smaller base from which they can do trading. They can't just reach everybody in the world. You have to be very specialized and dedicated if you're going onto the dark web to do something. And that's also a place where law enforcement is monitoring regularly, and it's got a smaller subset of criminality to find that needle in the haystack compared to the whole of the internet worldwide. There are dedicated efforts to look for wildlife trafficking online on the dark web. There is some taking place there right now. There is some trade in rhinoceros horn taking place on the dark web, because the money is so big, and because it's become so well known, and because it's been pushed off the platforms, public platforms, it's dwelling in that dark web center, and there is action being taken to deal with that. But obviously there are so many problems on the dark web. Law enforcement has got to prioritize as well. So another question we have in the few minutes we have left is, do you feel that legal conventions in place are sufficient incentives for tech platforms and companies to take the initiative seriously, or are they invested in this effort irrespective? I actually think that there aren't a huge number of conventions and laws in place that are putting pressure on the companies, and that's something that some people feel is an imbalance that needs to be corrected. But what we've always seen is, you're always going to get a better result by willing participants who understand that this is not just a case of protecting nature. This is also good business sense for them in reducing risk, in protecting their users, and making sure that their platforms are not a safe haven for criminality. So the companies are actually really bought into this. That we've found champions within all of the companies we work with who are passionate about wildlife, and they've managed to convince and have the rest of their business and their company understand the business case and not just the conservation case, because it makes it sound business practice to join this and be involved. And I do think there are probably some needs for looking at the regulations that relate to this and how we can better deal with it. But I do think that there are steps being taken in the arena called CITES, the international treaty that deals with wildlife trade globally through the United Nations, with 184 governments party to that. And we are starting to bring together cooperation between those parties and the companies as well. So we have a couple more minutes. How do I hope that this edition of the Paris Peace Forum will support the work of your project? Well, we came to the Paris Peace Forum. We were very proud to have been selected to present here, and we're grateful to the organizers for that opportunity. What we see with the Paris Peace Forum is a platform to get out to a wider audience, to get out to people, to make them understand the scale of this problem, but also understand in their thinking of how they work, to really understand that companies can play a critical role in everything we do. They have an opportunity here to make a major difference when in perhaps the more traditional systems like law enforcement or regulation have not been able to tackle the challenge head on directly themselves. And I think that the importance of the cooperation and mutual understanding of how we can collaborate between companies, the private sector and civil society is the reason we're here at the Peace Forum, to find ways in which we can collaborate with governance, to look at synergies between what we're doing and what other people are doing, and learning from the other presentations and speakers here, and make connections and network around that and look for new opportunities. And I hope we can do that too. So please connect with me through the Peace Forum channels, and I'll happily take that further with you. Okay. I think we have a final question, which is a humorous one. If you've seen The Tiger King on Netflix, the question is, have I seen The Tiger King? And I have. But do you think the type of documentary helps spread awareness of the issue, or instead glorifies animal traffickers? I mean, that's a fantastic question. And of course, I think media coverage around problematic issues of illegal wildlife trade is really important. But I really would not want to see anything that makes, even though I've met many illegal wildlife traffickers who are unbelievable characters, some of them are like the Tiger King I've met personally, and they are quite incredible and sometimes amusing, but the reality of what they're doing is they're devastating nature. They are stealing from local communities their livelihoods and their sovereign right to see and access their own natural surroundings and species, and they're stealing from them for their own profit. They're devastating populations. They're pushing species to the brink. They're engaged with criminal networks that are trafficking in humans, and sex trafficking and drug trafficking and trafficking in misery. And they're not people to be glorified. There are some people that think they're doing good for conservation if they're breeding animals, but they're actually stealing them from the wild to breed them. That's a misguided view as well. So I think whilst there are these incredible characters, it doesn't mean what we should glorify them or envy them or think that they're good people, because they basically are not. So thank you for that. I think we have a few seconds. Time is up. I've got to conclude. So I'm sorry I couldn't get to that very last question, but thank you everybody for your attention and for the amazing and really helpful questions. Thank you to the Paris Peace Forum. We'll leave that there. I look forward to further discussions over the coming days. Thank you again. Goodbye.